HUL256 lecture number 6, so the end of the third week of classes. And the plan for today is to wrap up the discussion of definitions and then move on to a new topic for next week, which is that of arguments, and that will take us, I think I estimate, another 2 or 3 weeks after that. So what I want to do today is, let me start by sharing my screen. I'm going to open up the reading that we had started. Well, actually, I'm going to open up this other reading by HUL that I assigned for today, and say a little bit about different kinds of definitions and the role that definitions can play in our reasoning and why we should care about it, why we should care about the topic as critical thinkers. And we spoke about this a little bit on Monday, but just to remind yourself, this goes back to the discussions we had even earlier on about the notion of a merely verbal dispute. So remember, let's take a case. Suppose somebody says, suppose there's a disagreement. The disagreement is one person says, Q is very well educated, as Q is completely uneducated. Remember, we took an earlier example of the case of freedom. This is another example of the case of education. Now, it may well be that it looks like X and Y seem to be contradicting each other, but one can imagine that, in fact, both of these statements are true because this term education may be vague or ambiguous. Can you think of a way in which what looks like a disagreement between X and Y might turn out to be not a disagreement after all?
So can you repeat, please?
So I'm giving you this example, right? It's in the chat box. One person, they're talking about a third party. Let's just call that person Q. And they say, one person says Q is very well educated, and the other person says, no, you're wrong. Q is not educated at all. That looks like a contradiction, right? They look like they're disagreeing with each other.
Yeah, it looks like, but no.
So I'm asking you, can you think of ways in which this might turn out not to be a genuine dispute?
Yes, sir. Basically, education may be like degree education or college education, or education may be moral education, maybe. So it's education.
In this case,
Yeah.
Maybe Y means, let's say,
Moral education.
Y, let's say education. I want to use model is a bit confusing, but let's say Y education is equal to, let's say, formal degree education.
Yeah, so we could, so for, I'm just adding some better words.
Yeah.
One could be a formal degree education, and another could be social education or education for manners.
So let's say for X, in mind, maybe education equals being widely read and well informed. And you can see that if education means the different things for these different people, then there may not be a disagreement, right? Q might not have any formal education, but nevertheless Q might be very widely read and well informed. Does that make sense?
Sir, it makes sense.
And so if you see this, one thing that we talked about earlier, right, that this is an example, a what's called merely verbal. Nothing really at issue, and we have to figure out by understanding what people, how people are using the word. We're trying to understand, what, if at all, they're disagreeing about. What we've just done is given an example or given examples of what both Hurley and Carroll talk about as precising definitions. So now if you were to witness this exchange between X and Y, you might say, look, tell me what you mean by the term education, or define education for me. And in this scenario, if X says, look, by education, I mean the following. I mean that somebody is educated if they are widely read and well informed. What they're offering to you is a precising definition. In the critical thinking space, this is the most useful kind of definition to think about, and it's always a useful tool to ask in a context, but what, how do you understand this term? How are you using this term? And when there's a range of different things that might be meant, also when you're speaking or writing, it's useful for yourself to think and maybe to express, this is how I'm understanding this term. So Hurley gives some more examples. Let's see. Where is it? I just missed it. So here's then. Why don't we have somebody read this out? Somebody who's ideally not read at all in class before, and there are many people here, so it should not be hard to find somebody. Anurag, you've not read?
No, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
The purpose of a precising definition is to reduce the vagueness of a word. As we saw in the first section of this chapter, an expression is vague if there is a borderline case in which it is impossible to tell if the word applies or does not apply. Words such as fresh, rich, and poor are vague. Once the vagueness of such words is reduced by a precising definition, one can reach a decision as to the applicability of the word to a specific situation. For example, if legislation were ever introduced to give direct financial assistance to the poor, a precising definition would have to be supplied, specifying exactly who is poor and who is not. The definition poor means having an annual income of less than $10,000 and a net worth of less than $20,000 is an example of a precising definition.
Okay, so just pause.
Whenever
Just, pause there. One important lesson to take from this example, which is the second key thing in the when talking about precising definitions, is often the same word. It makes sense to define a word one way in one context and another way in another context. And so it's often very useful to ask, what's the context that we're talking in? So as Hurley, as this example says, look, this is an example where legislation is introduced to give direct financial assistance to the poor. And this is just an example. Maybe that legislation in the US would give this as a definition. But just because for the purposes, and we might say, look, for the purposes of this statute, by poor we mean X. We mean, such and such. And if you look at any kind of legal language or a legal statute, you'll always see at the start some set of a set of definitions. So, for instance, a statute might say, homicide. The Indian Penal Code will prescribe some penalties for homicide and say, look, by homicide we mean such and such, the intentional killing of one person by another. So carry on, Anurag. Let's look at the next paragraph.
Whenever words are taken from ordinary usage and used in a highly systematic context, such as science, mathematics, medicine, or law, they must always be clarified by means of a precising definition. The terms force, energy, acid, element, number, equality, contract, and agent have all been given precising definitions by specific disciplines.
Okay, so just pause there. Um, Here's an important thing to see when you have like a technical concept, or a scientific concept. In the context of that scientific work, it might make a lot of sense. I mean, one should be using the term as that discipline is using it, but it's not to say that outside that context we have to use the word in the same way. It may be again a bit like X and Y. There may not be a disagreement. There may not be a real disagreement. It might be that in the technical sense the word means one thing, whereas in a non-technical sense it means something else. What's an example of that? Let's take for an example this case. So Anurag, you can read this para out.
Another example involves the practice of surgical transplantation of vital organs. Before a heart transplant can be conducted, the donor must be dead. Otherwise, the surgeon will be accused of murder. If the donor is dead for too long, however, the success of the transplant will be imperiled. But exactly when is a person considered to be dead? Is it when the heart stops beating, when the person stops breathing, when rigor mortis sets in, or some other time? The question involves the meaning of the term moment of death. The court have decided that the moment of death should be taken to mean that the moment the brain stops functioning, as a measure by an electroencephalograph. This decision amounts to the acceptance of a precise definition for moment of death.
Okay, so just pause there. What's important to see is that, look, this term, the moment of death, is being given one precising definition in this very specific legal context. In fact, not just legal context, but a legal context for the purposes of deciding issues of transplantation. But there may be other contexts in which we would want to give another precising definition of moment of death. Can you think of examples of that? Can you think of a context where, in other words, you wouldn't want to use this definition as the definition for the moment of death?
So then probably when someone has some issue in the brain, when it may stop functioning, but they still may be alive, like coma, etc. But not complete brain stops functioning. That's the closest I can get.
So one kind of case might be, we think, look, what we really care about in somebody's person being alive is they're being able to interact with us, to have thoughts, and here's this person who's we must look technically still alive in the sense that they meet this condition. Their brain is functioning as measured by an electroencephalograph, but for our purposes, we want to understand the term in in a broader kind of way. The moment of death is the moment at which it was clear that they could never participate in social life ever again. Does that make sense? Okay, there were some other people who wanted to speak.
Yeah. Like if the person is dead and like we are reminiscing his or her memories, then we could like speak like in his moment of death he was still brave. Or, like this is an example of a different context of the word.
Yeah, so it might be, as ordinary people, if you've ever been, and I'm sorry to bring such a gory kind of uh, example, but if you've been around somebody who's in the process of dying or whatever, I mean, you may say, look, okay, this looks like this person is dead, and you reminisce about that. Later on, they finally closed their eyes, they said their goodbyes. Well, maybe in this technical sense, they're at that particular moment their brain was still functioning, but it doesn't matter so much in our context. So the take-home point there is that when you have debates, when you offer precising definitions, some precising definitions may be more important in some contexts, other precising definitions may be more important in other contexts. We saw that in a way in the Bill Clinton case, the definition between a sexual relationship and a sexual act. In a legal context, there may be a clearer kind of differentiation than in a non-legal context. But the overall point is, when there's some danger that there's a range of possible meanings that one might mean by something in some particular kind of context, to avoid misunderstanding and to be kind of talking about the thing we want to be talking about, it's very useful to either request precising definitions or to offer precising definitions. Say, look, this is what I mean, and legal legal contexts, these technical contexts are often ways, particular cases where the ordinary meaning of a term is more vague, and then there's a very precise technical sense. What I want to emphasize is, just because the technical sense is more precise doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one to use in all contexts. And sometimes the looser term, in the looser context, makes sense. For instance, I was thinking of the case of I don't know if you remember the case of Rohit Vemula.
I remember.
People remember who this person?
Yes, I know this person.
Who was Rohit Vemula?
Sir, Hyderabad Central University student who committed suicide in 2016, 17 January, I think.
So many people after his death referred to his death as an institutional murder.
Yes, sir, institutional murder.
And I might say to somebody who said that, look, murder is just this act that's defined in the Indian Penal Code, and there's no such thing as institutional murder. By definition, there's no such thing as institutional murder. What would you say in response to that? Let me actually pick up the IPC definition in the meantime. Carry on, Hemant.
Sir, by the meaning, by the institutional order, murder, it means that this death is not normal. This is caused by institute. So this is maybe a murder in the sense.
So good. Let me just find the term on. I've just found a website where I can't cut and paste. Anyone else? Anyone else wants to add to that? here, what I want to do is I'll just share the screen. That's easier. Sharing a new window. Okay, so this is some random website I just opened for murder under the IPC, and you can say, look, here's the definition of murder. They involve, for instance, acts by which death is caused, was done with intention of causing death, or having intention to cause bodily injury which is likely to cause death. And somebody could say, look, this term institutional murder just doesn't make sense. The IPC has a very clear, precise definition of institutional murder. It involves, having this intention to cause harm to another person um, with some particular act that has that intention of causing death. The Rohit Vemla case is a case of suicide, so this term just doesn't make sense. Institutional murder is just, you might say, it's a contradiction in terms. And then the question I asked you was, somebody who thinks that this is a good term to use, what would they have in mind? And you want to add to what Hemant said? He said that, if I recall, it's a murder that's was not normal and which had to be investigated, something like that.
So it's caused by institute. It's
That the institute caused it in some sense. Or the institute should take responsibility. It's something that the institute should take responsibility for or is culpable for in some way, even though ultimately he is the person who killed himself. That's the kind of thought you'd have, right? So the point I want you to take away from this is that a reasonable thing to say, think about it the same way when one person says Rohit Vemala's death was murder, it was institutional murder, and another person says, no, Rohit Vemala's death was suicide, it wasn't murder. Maybe they're also not disagreeing. One person is offering a precise definition that has to do with the legal sense of the term murder, and the other person is offering a precise definition that has to do with, broadly speaking, who should bear responsibility for the death of another person. Okay, is that, or maybe I'll take a few more examples of other kinds of definitions and then take a set of questions. So that's the most common place where definitions come up. That's this notion. Now let me contrast the precise definition with two other kinds of definitions that actually both your texts mention. That's the notion of a stipulative definition and a lexical definition. So a stipulative definition is very common in fields like mathematics. You say, look, a set is a collection of objects. So a function, again, in a mathematical textbook, right? You'll see a set of definitions, axioms, and then proofs. And it would be strange to disagree with a definition of that kind. Look, that's just what they mean. Let me give you some more examples of stipulative definitions by sharing this screen. I don't know if I can. Switch screens. Okay, can you see the Hurley case?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So why don't I have somebody read out somebody else after Anurag? We'll start with this paragraph, the need for a stipulative definition. Or we can just start from here, a stipulative definition. Somebody who's not read before. And there are 29 people on the call, so there are many.
Should I start, sir?
Even you have read before, so I'm going to ask somebody else.
No, if there is no one wants to speak, then I can just start.
Okay, Arnesh. Should I call you Arnesh or Amrit?
Sir Arnesh.
Okay, Arnesh, go for it.
Right, from a stipulative definition, right?
Yeah.
A stipulative definition assigns a meaning to a word for the first time. This may involve either coining a new word or giving a new meaning to an old word. The purpose of a stipulative definition is usually to replace a more complex expression with a simpler one. The need for a stipulative definition is often occasioned by some new phenomena or development. For example, many years ago, lions were crossbred with tigers. The word tiger was selected to name the offspring of male tiger and female lion, and liger was selected to name offspring of a male lion and female tiger. When a zebra was crossbred with a donkey, the offspring was called a zedong.
Did you guys know
Crossbreeding.
this, by the way?
Sorry.
I said, had you guys heard of this before reading this? I had heard of tiger and ligon, but never zedong.
Right, same.
Yeah, even I
Okay,
did
so
not hear Zedong, so.
Zedong before, no? So you get the idea, right? So one kind of case where you have stipulative definitions are cases. Look, you're introducing a word for the first time into the language. You're coming up a word and say, look, this is what from now on, this is what this word is going to mean. I'm going to skip the several paras and maybe even skip the computer stuff. But you think how the term penicillin is defined? Well, penicillin is just defined by biologists as look as this chemical produced by these molds, and I guess afterwards, once it was synthesized in a lab, you can see look, the chemical with the following chemical composition is penicillin. The key point to note about stipulative definitions is in this para. Arnesh, why don't you carry on reading it?
Sure, sir. Because a stipulative definition is a completely arbitrary assignment of a meaning to a word for the first time, there can be no such thing such as a true or false stipulative definition. Furthermore, for the same reason, a stipulative definition cannot provide any new information about the subject matter of the definition. The fact that the word tigon was selected to replace the offspring of a male tiger and a female lion tells us nothing new about the nature of the animal in question. One stipulative definition may, however, be more or less convenient or more or less appropriate than another.
Okay, so let's just pause there. And the reason I mentioned this is to draw your attention to the difference between stipulative and precising definitions. It is offered by Hurley here. So why don't you carry on reading this paragraph?
Sure. A precising definition differs from a stipulative definition in that the latter involves a purely arbitrary assignment of the meaning, whereas the assignment of meaning in a precising definition is not at all arbitrary. A great deal of care must be taken to ensure that the assignment of meaning in a precising definition is appropriate and legitimate for the context within which the term is to be employed.
Okay, so let's pause there. So, and let's ask, this is time to take a minute and think about this distinction between stipulative definitions and precising definitions, and ask yourselves, do you have any questions, any doubts about the difference based on what you've read and what you've discovered? And the key difference being a stipulative definition is one where it's arbitrary. You get to decide. I'm going to get to decide how this word is to be used, whereas in a precising definition, you don't get to just make things up. You give precising definitions from a universe of possible definitions that the word already has in the language. That's the key difference. In the context that we will be looking at, or in general, we will look at, we won't see very much by way of stipulated definitions, but it's still a useful distinction to keep in mind. Are you making something up and you have full authority to say, look, here's what I mean by the term, then you are in the domain of the stipulative. Whereas if you're saying this term can have a range of different meanings in the language, and for our particular purposes, here's what I want it to mean, or here's how I am going to use the term, then one's offering a precising definition. So we can come back to that if there are questions. So the important thing to say is, again, in the case of stipulative, as Hurley points out, you can't really argue with the stipulative definition. It's up to the person who stipulates it to define things as they wish to. In the case of a precising definition, you can have disagreements. So as to which is the better precising definition to use in some particular context. So in the case of a precising definition, they might the axis of assessment of a precising definition might be appropriateness or inappropriateness, usefulness or uselessness. So if we go back, for instance, to the case of the education, where is it gone? Right, I'm just going to repeating this. Can you think of a context in which it would be a better use? One should, it makes sense to think of the term education in the first way rather than the second way. Or vice versa. Is the question not clear? Suppose I wanted to find when it's been many years since my grandfather passed away, but we used to live together, and at some point he required a companion who could help him out in various activities, and we might have thought, look, it would be good to find an educated companion who can help look after my grandfather. He was eyesight was not good. Maybe read the newspapers to him, and we could have maybe put an ad saying, looking for an educated person to help take care of an aging family member. which of these senses of education would be more appropriate in that kind of context?
The widely read one,
Why?
because to read someone's stories or newspapers or to accompany someone, you don't need a formal degree. I mean, it never really matters if you have a formal degree or not. But still, if you have read something, if you know much of the world, then you'd be a much better companion than someone who has a formal degree but has just passed out from college, if you understand what I'm saying.
Good. So that's So that's a context where the second form of, even though these are both perfectly, as definitions, they're perfectly adequate definitions. In this particular context, this definition would be a better definition to use. Hemant, you wanted to say something? I saw you unmuted yourself.
No, sir.
Okay. What about a context? What about the reverse kind of context? Is there a context where we would prefer this definition to the second one?
Yeah, when you recruit for a job in a company which requires some technical knowledge.
Well, even then, I
Yes.
suppose you could have the formal degree education without having that technical knowledge.
No, I mean, yeah, you need to have the formal degree education in that field. Like you need a job for computer science engineers, then you'd have someone who has a BTech in computer science also, something like that.
Really? So only BTechs in computer science can do jobs
No,
in.
sir, but it's not like that. But still, it is much more probable that they could do than someone else. Yeah, I should say it.
And certainly, it might be better than the second one,
Yeah, it is.
where
Yeah,
being
but,
widely read well informed may not be help you be a good computer engineer. So good. So again, the take-home point from here is to say, even though in many cases you can give a variety of precise definitions for the same term, and in some contexts, once you give those definitions, it'll be clear that people are not talking about the same thing. In particular contexts, some precise definitions will be more useful or more appropriate than others. That's the second point to note. The third point is something that Carroll makes clearer than Hurley does. So let me point here, and maybe Arnish, you could continue to read from this defining a vague expression.
So could you please repeat from where do I have to read?
At the top of the screen, defining a vague impression may clarify its meaning.
Right, thank you. Defining a vague expression may clarify its meaning, but one is under no obligation to accept the definition just because it is intelligence. Many arguments are grounded in definitions from which conclusions may be inferred. Being a definition does not shield a claim for criticism. For example, crime may be defined as an offense by an individual against the established rights of another individual. One may reject this definition if one believes that crime is not an offense against an individual, but also an offense against the society, and or that the term crime should also refer to offenses against the rights and haven't yet been established by law. In other words, you may think that a given definition of crime is unacceptable because it does not include conditions that you believe are essential. Yet, if you accept the definition uncritically, you may have to agree that an argument based on the definition is a good one, and that a conclusion that is supported by the argument is probably true, although in your heart you believe that the conclusion is false.
Okay, just carry into the next para and then we talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The example above regarding the definition of crime demonstrates that the definitions can be packed with theoretical implications. If crime is defined as an offense by one individual against the rights of another individual rather than as an offense against the society, then the concept of justice may include the idea of restitution of the criminal owing a debt to an individual, his or her victim, rather than to the society. The idea of punishment, as well as many related ideas, will also be affected by how crime is defined. Hence, it is important when evaluating an argument to identify the definitions of key terms, one attempt to determine what implications those definitions have. Likewise, when you are constructing an argument, it is important that you define your key terms that might have important implications for your argument. Clear definitions of key terms not only decrease the chance of being misunderstood, they also assist the reader in following your reasoning. In addition to providing definitions of key term forces you to be accurate and to think more clearly, both of which are essential to critical thinking.
Okay, thanks. So there's a lot going on in this passage. It's a difficult passage to think about, but the core issue is to illustrate a third kind of definition, which is a theoretical definition, and to point out one of the things to flag is what we just did. Defining a vague expression may clarify its meaning, but one is under no obligation to accept the definition just because it is intelligible, just because they are sensible. So we already saw an example of that, right? Both of these definitions of education are intelligible, but in some context, just because it's intelligible, it still may be the wrong definition to use. In this passage, Carroll is now going beyond that. And though he doesn't use the term in that first paragraph, he's talking about what we sometimes call theoretical definitions. And let's take this example that he has in mind. A crime may be defined as an offense by one individual against the established rights of another individual. And actually, think about the next sentence. One may reject it if one believes that crime is not only an offense against an individual, but also against society, or that it should refer to offenses that haven't yet been established. Why might you think that, by the way? How many people would want to reject this definition, and why? Go ahead.
I feel that this definition is too narrow to be accepted. I mean, as
What?
pointed out, there may be offenses against the society, or they may be
What's the
offenses
example?
that, what's an example?
What we look for is an example of something you would want to call a crime, but that doesn't fit this criteria.
For example, I can take a simple example. For example, I mean, individual rights here for individual rights, we are talking about human beings only. We may have animal rights as well, and other things, and the right to maybe a clean environment. Is that an individual right? Maybe we are polluting the environment, so that is also a crime. But is that an individual right? That is a societal right. Matlab, the society has a right to a clean or green environment. Maybe something like that, on those lines.
So nice. So it might be that, after the Bhopal gas tragedy, if people said, "Look, I can't believe I've forgotten the company. What is the company's? Do you guys remember the company behind the Bhopal gas tragedy?"
Union Carbide?
Union Carbide, thank you. Right, so somebody said of the managers of Union Carbide have committed um, a criminal act, and you went and said, "Hey, no, they haven't committed a criminal act because it's defined in this way, it's an offense by one individual against the established rights of another individual. But hey, the law doesn't recognize an established, there's no established right to a clean environment, so they haven't committed a criminal act. It's a little bit like the institutional murder kind of case, right? Where somebody like Avnish might say, no, well, the law should recognize this. A crime is something more general. And then we have to start thinking about what those more general considerations are. Just as in the case of, talking about institutional murder, the debate about whether it's really murder or not is really a more theoretical debate about who is ultimately responsible for death, how should we respond to them. In the same way, this question about whether this definition is correct has consequences. It has consequences beyond the definition itself. For instance, it leaves out the possibility that polluting the environment, or as Anish said, maybe committing violence against an animal, one should think of those as crimes. So I see Shambhav has a hand up.
Yeah, but like in the case of, say, the Bhopal gas tragedy, isn't that a crime within this definition? Because at the end of the day, it had a victim. Somebody's right of life was infringed because people died. So hence it is a crime.
Well, it's a bit unclear because it will depend partly on this established rights of an individual. We have a right to life in general, but suppose I'm traditionally, at least in the law, a right to life would be a right not to be killed by you, which is more than, or which is narrower than the right to a clean environment. So traditionally in the right to life would be like, look, I violated your right to life if I have killed you. I have not violated your right to life if I have done something negligently without targeting you because of some other purpose that I had. In a way, that's the kind of debate that we are having. How should we think of the right to life? The question of what counts as a crime is related to the question of what we think of as the right to life, whether it's a broad right or a narrow right. Again, I'm imagining a situation where, in fact, there's no legal right to a safe environment or to a clean environment. There's a gas leak somewhere. There's a gas leak in some industrial plant. 50 kilometers away, the air, this noxious gas wafts over from there to my house and I die. Has the industrial plant violated my right to life? Well, depends partly. Have they committed a crime? Depends partly on what we think that they should be responsible for. But maybe the broader point that Carol's going to be is making, one can see, thinking about this clause. Can you think, why would somebody believe this? Why would somebody want to reject the definition because of this clause?
Sir, sir, in clause B, you are saying, yeah?
Clause A.
Oh, A not. I'm talking about B. Got it.
Society rather than individual. Shambhav, did you want to come in again?
Yeah, if somebody believes, say, something like prostitution or drug use, it's say immoral or against societal values and hence should be disbanded. In that case, he can consider prostitution or drug use to be a crime against society, since in essence it does not have any particular, say in prostitution there is no victim per se because it is between two consenting adults, but yet it should be considered a crime in that person's opinion.
That's right. So you have what are called victimless crimes. So if you thought of if you bought this definition that it's an offense by one individual against the established rights of another individual, then there'd be no grounds to criminalize prostitution because, quote unquote, it's known as already certain forms of prostitution, consensual prostitution, a victimless crime. What is Carroll's point? Carroll's point is, look, this definition carries a lot of weight. Just because it's one amongst many possible definitions, doesn't mean it should automatically get a pass, because it has implications. For instance, it has the implication that prostitution should not be criminalized. That may or may not be true, but you don't want to be in a position where you agree to a definition that has sort of strong theoretical consequences that later on you disagree with. That's the point that he's making. If you accept the definition uncritically, you may have to agree that an argument based on the definition is a good one, and that a conclusion that is supported by the argument is probably true, although in your heart you believe the conclusion is false. So in other words, somebody who thought that, look, prostitution is this radical evil in society that has to be eradicated by the coercive power of the state through the machinery of the criminal law, then I better resist this definition, even though the definition is perfectly legitimate and intelligible. It may be incorrect in the sense that it has theoretical implications that have to be worked out. So this is why this is the domain of the theoretical definition. Let me go back to Hurley for a second for another kind of example. So Arnesh, why don't you continue here with this line from this paragraph?
Right. The theoretical definition assigns a meaning to a word by suggesting a theory that gives a certain characterization to the entities that the term denotes. Such a definition provides a way of viewing or conceiving these entities that suggest deductive consequences, further investigation, experimental or otherwise, and whatever else would be entailed by the acceptance of a theory governing these entities. The definition of the term heat found in texts dealing with kinetic theory of heat provides a good example. Heat means the energy associated with the random motion of molecules of a substance. The definition does not merely assign meaning to the word, it provides a way of conceiving the physical phenomena that is heat. In so doing, it suggests the deductive consequences that as the molecules of a substance speed up, the temperature of the substance increases. In addition, it suggests that the number of experiments investigating the relationship between molecular velocity and the phenomena of radiation, gas pressure, molecular elasticity, and the molecular configuration. In short, the definition of heat provides the impetus for an entire theory about heat.
Okay. So let's just pause there and think about that claim. So the example of crime and the example of heat, in giving a definition, the point is you're not just making a linguistic point about how this is how I'm going to use the term. That's part of what you're doing, but you're kind of buying into a larger theoretical framework of which to think about that phenomenon. A very famous example of that, this kind of characterization, comes from a paper that some of you may be familiar with. I think I mentioned. Did I talk about the Turing test in the first couple of lectures? People are familiar with this notion, the Turing test? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's let's take a new volunteer just to read out this first paragraph and then we'll take a break and then come back and talk more about it. I'm keeping somebody who's not read before, and you've not read before?
I have read once.
So somebody else then. Srijit. Go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah. So just this paragraph, I propose to consider the question.
I propose to consider the question, can machines think? This should begin with definitions of the meaning of the terms machine and thing. The definitions might be framed so as to reflect so far as possible the normal use of the words, but this attitude is dangerous. If the meaning of the words machine and think are to be found by examining how they are commonly used, it is difficult to escape the conclusion that the meaning and the answer to the question, can machines think, is to be sought in a statistical survey such as a Gallup poll. But this is absurd. Instead of attempting such a definition, I shall replace the question by another, which is closely related to it and is expressed in relatively unambiguous words.
Okay, so just pause there. I'm going to ask you to read one other paragraph from Hurley, and this is in the context of what Hurley calls a lexical definition. So why don't you read? Yeah.
A lexical definition is used to report the meaning that a word already has in a language. Dictionary definitions are all instances of lexical definitions. Thus, in contrast with a stipulated definition, which assigns a meaning to a word for the first time, lexical definition may be true or false, depending on whether it does or does not report the way a word is actually used. Because words are frequently used in more than one way, definitions have the further purpose of eliminating the ambiguity that would otherwise arise if one of the meanings were to be confused with another.
Okay, just pause. Hang on a second. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go back now. We've seen what a lexical definition is. If you see these sentences, they might be framed so as far as to reflect normal use of words. If the meaning of the word machine and think are to be found by examining how they are commonly used, it is difficult to escape the conclusion that the meaning and answer to this question can be sought by a statistical survey such as a Gallup poll. So let me ask you this. What would be absurd about, now Turing has asked us the question, can machines think? And he said that this should begin with the definitions of the meaning of the terms machine and think. And now if I said to you, look, that's easy. All I have to do is let's just go to the dictionary and see whether the dictionary will tell us, the answer to this question will be found in the dictionary, or it will be found by doing a poll of 10,000 people and asking them whether machines can think. So Turing says this is absurd. And my question to you, which I'm going to come back, I'm going to take a 3 or 4 minute break, is why is it absurd to look for the answer to the question, can machines think, by consulting a dictionary? I'm going to step away for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and in that time you can think about this, chat about this. Actually, maybe in addition, what I'll do is let me play you a small video clip of a gadget that I don't know if you're familiar with, Where's it gone? Can you get the sound as well? The voiceover?
No, the sound is not there. We are not able to.
Okay. Okay, rather than try and set that up, actually, maybe not so hard to set it up. Let's see. Check content. Okay, it'll take a while for me to figure the. Oh, there we are. Include to result. Okay, try again. Now? Can you hear that? Could you guys hear that?
The screen is not shared as yet.
Oh, I see. Thanks so much for. Okay, now?
The 2 hours, recharging and continuing automatically if necessary until your home is beautifully clean. A full suite of sensors and a visual localization system help.
So, could you hear that?
Yes, it's audible now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm just going to play another.
The Roomba 980
seconds.
map your home as it cleans, so it always knows exactly where it is, where it's been, and where it needs to go next. Unlike other vacuum cleaning robots, the Roomba is designed for real homes, inspired by the experiences of over 13 million Roomba owners. Its low-profile design enables it to clean under furniture. A spinning side brush gently sweeps wall edges.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. So in addition to this question, why is it absurd to look for the answer to the question, can machines think by consulting a dictionary? Let me ask you this question. Can the iRobot Roomba think? So think about this question and think about what you're doing when you think about that question. What sorts of considerations are relevant? And I'll come back. It's 6:06. I'll come back at 6:10 to carry on this discussion. Okay. Thoughts? How many people think the iRobot Roomba can think?
Sir, this question rather depends on the definition of think, because I have read Turing's article. According to him, thinking is what a human being does. I mean, thinking is something like we do, that we can make our thoughts about several matters. I mean, if you define something like thinking is something that goes on in something analogous to brain inside any body, such that it can complete its work, then iRobot Roomba can think. But according to Turing, iRobot Roomba cannot think.
Okay, others? Hemant, you unmuted yourself?
Sir, I think thinking is a part of living. Thinking is a part of living species, basically, like animals or we humans. We can think. How can robot think?
Okay, anyone else? Anyone want to defend? Anyone else? Arun kind of gave both
Sir,
sides
I
of the
think,
story.
can
Hang
I
on, so
speak?
now hands up, because now there are 4 or 5 people. So anyone who wants to intervene, raise your hands, and we'll start with Abhishek and then Srijit.
Sir, so I think that Roomba cannot think. That is because, like, according to me, so this defines again, as somebody spoke, it depends on the definition of think. But when we talk about the iRobot Roomba think, we are actually defining a set of instructions it should follow, and by think we actually mean that it should do something on its own. So it cannot think, in my opinion.
Okay, Srijit?
Sir, the question was that why is it absurd to look at the answer to the question, can machines think, by consulting a dictionary? So
Okay.
I think that like I looked the meaning. I looked up the meaning of think in a dictionary, and it said that having a particular opinion, belief, or idea about someone or something. So if we like look at that definition, then a machine cannot think, because um, like a machine is programmed to learn from the data that it has been provided, and um like uh, it doesn't have its own opinion or beliefs. So if we look at that definition, then machines can't think. So
But why is it an absurd? I mean, he thinks it's an absurd question to ask. I mean, it's an absurd way of answering the question.
yeah, like I am opposing the concept of,
You disagree with him.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, Sujit?
Yes, sir, I'm completely agree with the Abhishek that the machines are actually programmed that they can't do nothing more than what they are programmed. They are bound with some specific boundaries, and they like us humans, we can think of anything. The robots can't do that.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm hearing mostly from the I would have thought at IIT, a lot of people who would be like, no, of course it's thinking. But let's hear from a couple of other people, Avyansh and Aditya.
So with respect to the first question, why is it absurd to look for the answer to the question, can machines think, by consulting a dictionary? What I was thinking is it's related to the fact that there are too many definitions for think in the dictionary itself. So that's why it's absurd to refer to a dictionary.
Okay, good. That may be part of it. Yeah.
In my
hang on.
opinion,
Aditya. Yeah.
in my opinion, you can say that the Roomba can think in some ways. Like the Roomba can think about the room it is in some ways. Like it can avoid walls, for example, and it can create a map of the room inside it. And that is something like a thought, but it is not exactly like a thought how we would imagine it, but it is analogous to it.
Okay, good. So it's able to solve certain kinds of problems.
No, sir, but it is programmed now. It's already inbuilt some algorithms to think this. Thinking means we think on any condition or any situation. Thinking doesn't mean forced. I think it's like it's forced to do this.
No.
Sir, excuse me.
Okay, hang on. So this Arun was in queue, and
Yeah.
then Sumita has a question. Yeah. Go ahead, Arun.
Yeah. Sir, I wanted to say that most of the people have said that machine is programmed and being programmed is forced, but I disagree with this thought. Because you mean, how can we say that humans are not programmed by something much greater than them? I mean, then we can also say that we cannot think. We are programmed to react in such certain situations with some certain actions, and but what we do, we call them thoughts. So if we consider machines are a different species, then I would say they can think.
Then we could have this intuitive question, like can cats think, for instance, one might ask. Look,
Yes,
why
sir.
did I bring this up? I brought this up to point out that there seems to be this disagreement, and it seems to be everyone agrees that the disagreement has to do with kind of, as Turing puts it, the definition of the term think. And there are two things I want to take away from this. One is that this is an example of a theoretical definition. What you guys have been doing is giving examples of theoretical definitions. For instance, definitions that involve, on the one hand, perhaps the carrying out of an algorithm. On another hand, maybe the fact that it's done by a living creature. On the third, this idea that it has to have some amount of freedom, it can't be programmed. And what I think is going on when you have these arguments is one is familiar with, one has paradigm instances in one's head of what thinking is, and then one's asking us, look, what are the core features, what are the core characteristics of this? And then you ask, in the case of machines, could they have those core characteristics? And in the, in the conversation that might arise as a result, we may even change our minds. We might say, look, from a theoretical point of view, this thing actually is thinking, or it's not thinking. The question of is the answer right or wrong, to me, is not the point of why I mean, whether the answer is yes or no is actually a deep theoretical question that, I think there's still no, at least amongst philosophers, consensus on. It depends upon many important things, the nature of the self. It's a very interesting field called the philosophy of mind, and it's very close to areas like computer science. But the key point is that, look, this is a theoretical investigation. This can't be settled by looking at the established meanings of words. And that's why the answer to this question, this mode is absurd. The problem you're trying to solve when you ask the question, or the reason you ask the question, can the iRobot Roomba think, is, or the more general question, can machines think? You have in mind a certain kind of activity that human beings carry out, and you wonder whether that activity can also be carried out by non-human objects. And if that's what you're interested in, then you're really interested in these concepts and in thinking about these concepts, and consulting a dictionary is not going to give you an answer. Consulting a dictionary or asking people how the words are used is not going to be is not going to be helpful. So what I want you to see is the nature of what the task you guys just did, which is an illustration of providing theoretical definitions as a means of answering a question. And that's really like that's the stuff of philosophy. So when people talk about giving a definition of democracy or freedom of speech, or I mean, take any contentious thing, free will, we're in the business of theoretical reflections about on philosophy, and those are not the kinds of things that you can settle by doing a poll or by consulting a dictionary. But to zoom back into these different kinds of definitions that we looked at, right? The precising definition, the stipulative, the lexical, and the theoretical. So that's what I want you to take away. There's a final kind of definition that Hurley talks about, the persuasive definition. So I'll leave that to you guys to think of examples and what it means. And again, this will come up for you in your lives as critical thinkers. Often when you're engaged in disagreements with somebody and thinking about what the source of that disagreement is, how it might be resolved, what are the alternative answers to it. And at least one of the takeaways from the question of theoretical definitions should be that sometimes these things are quite complex. It's not something that you can just settle and say, look, thinking is defined as such and such, therefore the iRobot Roomba cannot think. Be the person who's asking that question, a person like Alan Turing, who's incredibly deep thinker, genius, has something in mind in asking that question, and it opens up this broad theoretical field. So it's not, we won't really be that concerned with theoretical definitions in the rest of the course, but it's important to give you a feel of what that involves. So I'll stop there. We have one tutorial tomorrow, where I'm happy to talk about this stuff more. So one of the things I want to say is, as you can see, the stuff gets complex and dense. We covered a fair amount of material today, so it gets complex and dense quite quickly. And I really do encourage you as a result to start attending tutorials. We had 2 tutorials with very light attendance, and I think that's the space to have more.
Tomorrow 4 to 5 is tutorial, no? Tomorrow 4 to 5 is the time.
Yeah. So tomorrow 4 to 5 is the C group tutorial. No, I'm saying that people should, if you've not come to A and B, I would suggest you start coming regularly to any of the slots.
Yes, sir. I will come tomorrow.
I will come tomorrow. Many of us just forgot about slot timings on Wednesday, so we missed.
Yes, sir. Also, Wednesday we were free basically. But
okay. So let's start coming regularly and carry on some of these discussions. For tomorrow, we can talk more about what we talked about today, and also hopefully get a chance to talk about Nazi propaganda. Yeah. Okay, and then the propaganda thing will come up next week, and I think your minor 1 assignment will also be around propaganda.
I think so. There is an assignment on Moodle. I have seen today.
Yeah, that's an assignment for next week. That's your assignment for Monday. Oh yeah, that's the other thing too. The other piece of information. Look up Moodle. I'll post another assignment. These are the short answer questions. The 5-mark questions. One of them is due Monday midnight, and the other I think I'll make due maybe Friday midnight. So that's also worth doing. Yeah. Okay. So see you guys. See some of you tomorrow.